To start out, I have to apologize. I don't usually sound like Darth Vader, but I'm on the tail end of a cold right now, so bear with me, and I'll try to get through this without losing my voice. Okay, I want to start out by thanking Adam and the organizers of this meeting for giving me the chance to talk about Ocean Genome Legacy. So I'm the director of the Ocean Genome Legacy Center at Northeastern University. And what I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about who we are and what we're trying to accomplish. So to begin with, we are a nonprofit center within Northeastern University, and our mission is to explore, preserve, and protect the biodiversity of the oceans. But we're doing that in a way that might be a little bit different from what most of you might have thought about before. We're doing that by creating the nation's first marine-dedicated public DNA bank. Okay, so what the heck is a DNA bank? A DNA bank is typically a type of biological repository that stores DNA samples and tissues from which DNA can be extracted. Typically, a DNA bank will store materials in tubes in ultra-cold freezers like you see here. And the main reason for doing this is twofold. One is for archival or historical preservation of those materials, so those materials will be available in the future for future study. And the second is to support important research. And this is really the part of our mission that's most important to me. So I always like to start out by pointing out that we didn't invent biobanking. This idea has been around a while in our culture, and there are already lots of types of biobanks that you're already familiar with, like blood banks. There are banks that store organs, tissues, reproductive materials, microorganisms, seeds, and more we're now starting to see banks that store DNA. But most of these banks have been designed, and they've proven themselves in helping to advance research in medicine and in agriculture, but very few of these banks have been created that are dedicated to natural environments, and particularly not to the marine environment. And so that's why we decided to create Ocean Genome Legacy. Ocean Genome Legacy began at New England Biolabs in Ipswich, Mass. We've recently moved to Northeastern University's Marine Science Center, north of Boston, on the island of Nahant. It's a beautiful place, and if any of you have ever been there, you'll know that. If you'd like to come out and visit, we'd love to have you. So our aim in creating Ocean Genome Legacy, again, is twofold. Our first purpose is to try to capture and document some of the disappearing biological diversity of the ocean. And second, and closest to my heart, is to use that biodiversity to enable research that will help to preserve and protect and restore our oceans. So to start out with, you might be wondering, well, how important is it to preserve biological diversity from the oceans? How much of the world's biodiversity is found in the sea? And it turns out, actually, the answer is quite a bit. I just want to give you one example. If you look at the tree of life for animals, we generally divide the animal tree of life up into 32 branches. These represent the major life forms of animals. And we call them phyla. So of those 32 animal phyla, 31 have representatives that are found in the ocean. There's only one known phylum of animals that doesn't have species found in the ocean. 22 of those phyla are mainly marine. So what that means is fully 2/3 of all the major branches of life are found primarily in the oceans. So really, if you want to understand the diversity of life on our planet, and we do, you can't ignore the oceans. Of course, with this crowd, I don't think I have to explain that the oceans are endangered. We know that many of the same things that are affecting life in the terrestrial world that we hear about, climate change, all the issues associated with rising human populations, they're affecting the oceans as well. And one of the main results is loss of diversity. We're losing species, and we're losing diversity within species at unprecedented rates. So the question is, what can we do about that? How can we begin to capture some of this biodiversity in meaningful ways? It turns out that one of the best ways to do that is through DNA, through molecular biology. So DNA is the information molecule of life. The genome, or the total DNA of an individual organism or an individual species, it contains all of the information that that organism needs to do everything in its life, to live and grow and reproduce. It determines how long organisms will live, what they're capable of, what their vulnerabilities are. So in a way, you could think of the DNA or the genome as the program or the blueprint that operates that organism. So if you have that information, you know, or if you have that genome, you have a lot of information about the organism. So what we're trying to do at Ocean Genome Legacy is really create a cooperative experiment. Our idea is to set out to create a way that scientists and the public can work together to collect and preserve genomes from marine organisms, and to provide those to scientists for research that can help us to understand some of the great challenges that the oceans are facing. So let me tell you a little bit about how OGL works. We're very collaborative. We work with all kinds of researchers, not just professional scientists and academic and research institutions, but also with the DIY do-it-yourself scientists and amateur specialists in various taxa. These people go out and collect organisms and provide, donate subsamples of tissues or other sources of DNA to OGL. We then prepare those samples for long-term preservation. Usually that means in ultra-cold freezers. We then extract DNA from those samples. Some of that DNA goes back into the biorepository for long-term storage, and the remainder becomes available for distribution to the research community to support all kinds of research. And we do support many different types of research. Just to give you an idea of the size of the collection, it's still small, but it's growing rapidly. We have over 23,000 DNA samples. These numbers, by the way, are a little bit old. We're now closing in on close to 5,000 species represented in our collections. They've been collected by over 500 different individuals from approximately 200 institutions around the world. And those samples are being used for many different purposes. Just a few examples. A surprising number are being used in medical research. So we have researchers around the world in several countries using our samples to look for new types of antibiotics, new anti-pain drugs, such as this one is an anti-pain drug derived from a cone snail, and anti-cancer agents. We also have researchers using our samples to understand the evolution of mechanisms of cancer. But we're also have people using our samples to understand diseases of marine organisms. For example, we have researchers at Cornell University using our samples to study sea star wasting disease, which is a viral disease many of you might know has had tremendous impact on sea stars on the west coast of the US over the past several years. And then finally, I want to mention the Narwhal Genome Project. So there's a group using samples from Ocean Genome Legacy to sequence the genome of the narwhal. So for those of you who are familiar, this is this incredible tusked whale. It lives at the edge of the Arctic ice. And like many organisms, it's dependent on that ice for its survival. So we're hoping that having genomes for this organism and many organisms like it that depend on Arctic ice, we'll be able to learn much more about their biology, and that will be helpful in understanding how to manage these species as Arctic ice becomes less and less abundant. So just to wrap up, the challenge of this meeting is asking the question of how we can protect and restore oceans. And what I put to you is that we can't really protect things that we don't understand and that we don't have complete knowledge of. And so it's urgent, it's extremely important that we begin to collect and preserve and study the genomes of marine organisms. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of pretty video just to get a chance to appreciate some of the beautiful biodiversity of the oceans. But I also want to say that if anything that I've said interests you, please go to our website. That's our URL. The easier way to find it is just Google Ocean Genome Legacy, and take a look at our website and see how you can get involved in OGL. There's a lot of ways to do it. This is an extremely important job. It's not terribly expensive to do. We can typically archive and preserve a genome for in perpetuity for under $100. So any one of you could save a genome, save a species. Okay, so I'll leave it with that. You can finish watching this lovely video and think of any questions that you might want to ask me.